while we'll come to your journey and how you built this, the thing that's top of mind for everyone today is the pandemic. So, how have the last 12 months been for you? How has it impacted the business overall? How has it impacted your employees? And what are the steps that you've taken? And how do you see this evolving? I know it's a long question, but we'd like to understand your overall view on the pandemic. The question is more of a pointer, but we'd just like to understand how this pandemic has affected you, your business, your employees, and how do you see the future panning out?
Sure. So, firstly, Prasad, thank you for having me. Travel and tourism has been one of the worst hit industries, sectors in the world, right? Across the world, it's been very badly hit. And of course, there were months of lockdown in India, which varied state to state in terms of what kind of business we could do. And so we had to take a very dynamic approach to how we dealt with the pandemic. We focused in on the things which were most important to us, at the very beginning. And that one of those things, which, was part of your question, it was about employee communication. We wanted to remain extremely engaged with our employees because we knew that there was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety amongst everyone sort of, within the organization about what's going on, what's going to happen to them health-wise, what's going to happen to them from a job perspective. And so for us to maintain the confidence of our people was one of our, highest priorities, and to also keep them engaged during this period, right? I mean, of course, we got this opportunity to go to start using technological tools like Zoom quite a bit more, and and it was something that we had wanted to do, and it actually accelerated us to come to that point of being able to do that. But by using these tools, we were able to engage with our employees fairly continuously, and so we invested in hundreds of hours of training throughout the course of the lockdowns, particularly. And it was amazing. I mean, we had just very recently set up a dedicated L&D department, and that department really got to shine throughout the time of the lockdowns. So it was that way it was actually very fulfilling. We coming out of some of those lockdowns, we actually, looking back, could feel very fulfilled with what we had done during that time, even though business had not really been there. The other two things that we of course focused on while the lockdowns were happening were on communication with our guests to tell them that, listen, we're doing everything that we can to maintain the brands, and we want to be in touch with you, and all of that. And then of course cost rationalization was a huge factor, right? We made a very conscious choice not to lay off any of our employees. We only did nominal salary cuts at the top 3% of the organization. Most of our employees are local people in the destinations where we exist. So it is very, very important to us that we keep our employees safe. So in order to balance those, the finances of the organization, we needed to do, very thoughtful cost rationalization across the group. And that was it was a collaborative effort. There was a lot of Zoom calls, actually, a lot of Excel sheets to make that happen. And so it was a really great exercise. And each of our hotels, of course, came out of the lockdowns at various times. I think the Tamara came out for about a month in June, I think, and then we went back in for a month, and then we came back out. And Kodai was shut for 5 months. Obai Tamara in Trivandrum was never shut, but it was, there was the long lull. And one of our hotels has just recently reopened in Bangalore, which is one of our mid-segment hotels called Lilac. That hotel just very recently reopened. The recovery since the initial lockdowns has been, it follows the same trends which have been happening sort of worldwide, right? So our leisure hotels, which thankfully are within driving distance of major metropolitan cities, they've recovered very quickly, and they're actually hitting all-time highs. People took revenge travel very seriously. They wanted to get out. They wanted to get out to places which were open and were considered safe, right? So another thing that we worked on during the lockdown was something called Raksha Initiative. And this was our guidelines that were developed, learning from sort of the best from around the world of what we could do to ensure that we were not spreading COVID, right? So there were guidelines that were there meant for employees, and there were guidelines that were meant for guests as well. There was enormous amount of training that went into that. So when the lockdowns came out, we're sort of ending and people were starting to travel, we were able to create that trust amongst our guests to return to our properties. And like I said, particularly in our properties, one of the intrinsic strengths that we had was space. Our property in Coorg is 180 acres of organic coffee plantation and natural forest. And we only have 56 cottages. So it was, it was very easy to, people were very happy to come and sort of be there in the fresh air and get out of their houses and their apartments. In Kodaikanal, similarly, we have a large property, and again, we only have 53 keys there, and so people have come out, and so the leisure travel has recovered very nicely, very quickly, and it's very heartening to see that the domestic market can support us so well, right? The domestic captured market within the state, really, for the most part, can support us so well, and so that's been a really nice thing to see, and to see the kind of the loyalty and the love which has been given to us by our guests in these places has been very heartwarming. Of course, city hotels have not recovered like that, right? City hotels have needed to offer something with a leisure element in order to attract people. So, for instance, our hotel in Trivandrum, which is our largest project yet and was only launched in December of 2019, we have a very strong F&B offering. We are, right now we're currently our O Cafe, which is our main restaurant, is the #1 restaurant in Trivandrum, and that was a reputation that we built over the course of a year. And so we were constantly sort of innovating on that. How do you either, we started with delivery and, bringing meals to people's homes. And then when, the festivals rolled around, we were delivering sadhyas, 29 dishes to people's homes at a very attractive price. And in that way, sort of, we were innovating and sort of keeping the business going in that way. And then, of course, since people can now come, we're innovating in the sense that there are different things of interest which kind of keep people coming back over and over again. And so that F&B element has been really, really important for us in that hotel. In addition, of course, small weddings, gatherings, that was something that we were able to do as per the guidelines of the government. And again, I think, I think about the wedding market, and weddings are something which families prepare for years and years and years, and so they're not, a lot of the weddings didn't stop because of COVID. They had to change. So as per the guidelines, people are, they had to downsize the size of their wedding, but they actually had more that they could spend on the wedding itself. And so we saw that a lot of people who wouldn't have necessarily considered a 5-star venue before the pandemic were now looking at a venue like ours for their small gathering of 50, 100, 200 people as per the guidelines. And so that was also something which was something which was really good in terms of tiding us over. And then, of course, I think the other thing that we did, and, I mentioned this briefly, is that, looking back, we felt like it was such a fulfilling year, is that we invested a lot in terms of using technology in various ways, right? So, of course, Zoom is, and these sort of bringing, medical professionals to talk to our staff about, COVID and educating them about that, bringing mental health support through these online resources. I mean, we were able to do a lot of that. We were also, we were able to really innovate. I mean, we are in the process of moving a lot of things to a paperless, to paperless from sort of these physical logbooks, which are very typical of old hospitality, where we developed an app where we can do a lot of really interesting things. We were able to kind of leverage a lot of the, these cool things that we were able to develop in-house, which, and we now had the time to, and like the ability to focus on that during this time. And so that's been a really exciting thing for me as a leader, because these are things which, you want to do, but you don't necessarily have the time or the focus to do when you're sort of running a rigorous operation. And so in that way, we were able to do quite a bit during this period of time, and it's been really exciting. So long question, long answer.
No, no. I think it's heartening to hear a lot of stuff that you're telling us, especially in terms of how you've been able to nurture your employees during this period, and obviously been able to reach out to customers. But there are two other aspects of your business which which look at the macro environment around you. One is obviously, I'm sure, while you work with a number of large suppliers, I'm sure there are also some micro and small entrepreneurs that you work with, right? How have you seen the impact on of the pandemic on what they do, what how they do business with you, and how has there been something that you've been able to do to protect them or encourage them, or have there been any success stories that have come out of the pandemic through some of your vendor relationships?
Yeah, so I mean, I have to say it has been difficult, right? I mean, the entire ecosystem was affected. I know even now, a year in, there are still things which, vendors don't have access to, and therefore we don't have access to. So we've had to change a lot of the ways in which we work. We've had to adapt to sort of these new things. We work with, for instance, women's NGOs in Kerala to supply us with our minibar snacks. Like that's something that we were really committed to since the beginning, and I think that relationship continues to exist. It is hard, right? I think that it's been, it has been a challenge for everybody to sort of get through this. I think in terms of us, like we are very, we've always treated our vendors like stakeholders of, real stakeholders of the organization, right? So I was just remembering yesterday, just before the lockdown, we had one of our last vendor appreciation meets where a number of our important vendors came into one of the properties, and we were able to express our appreciation and take their feedback and really provide them with a nice lunch and have them experience the property themselves. And so we've always had this good relationship with our vendors, and we're very clear about making sure that vendor payments go out on time, and we've always had that. I mean, I think, and because of that, because of these relationships that we've developed with them and the trust that we developed with them, I haven't seen that much disruption. I think that for the most part, they've been, we treat each other as partners, and therefore we are able to sort of, kind of go through this together. But I think that's, I mean, I would have to look a little bit more deeply to see if there was anything specific, like any specific cases. But broadly speaking, I have not, beyond the fact that, yes, there has been some difficulty for vendors to get access to certain, ingredients, for instance, and therefore for us. And that too, mostly, I have to say, it's again, like in like Kodaikanal, right? Or in Coorg. It's not even so much in Coorg, but that has been, I mean, there is a challenge there. But in the cities and things like that, I mean, there hasn't been that much of a,
Sure. So, other than that, the second thing that I was going to point out or point to was eco-sensitivity and environment friendliness, right? That's something that's a key element of the way we perceive the brand from the outside, right? But from the inside, what are the principles that guide you from the perspective of the environment? We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so we consider ourselves responsible hoteliers, right? So what that means is that we take this idea of sustainability and we apply it in our decision making throughout. And the tenets on which we do that are people, profit, and planet. So each one of them, if you look at it and you go deeper, you can see it's sort of like what we do, right? So when it comes to people, for instance, we mostly hire locally. More than half of our employees are from the local communities. We do, of course, a number of CSR initiatives within those local communities, whether it's, cleanup drives, whether it's like, I mentioned the associating with NGOs for snacks and other supplies and things like that. We invite local people onto our properties to, of course, train our staff, whether it's in the local cuisine or, in other ways. We also ensure that, the practices, I mean, the HR practices are something which are really sort of top notch. So I think we may have been one of the first organizations to introduce a paternity leave, like, to a much larger extent, like, years ago. And And these were all things that were really important to us. We always believe, my belief has always been, if you treat your people well and you invest in your people, then they will be happy to work for us, and therefore we will have, happy guests, right? So happy employees equals happy guests. So the people aspect of it is one in which we try to work collaboratively and we're fair, right? Our practices are fair and transparent, and we try to have very good practices as such. On the planet perspective, which is sort of the most obvious one, I think people kind of associate environmental sustainability as sort of the core, and it's definitely it's a part of it, and it's a large part of it. So on the planet perspective, what we do is because we control the entire life cycle of our properties thus far, right? So we design, build, and operate. Because of that, we're able to make very mindful, thoughtful choices in the way that we do that, each of those steps, right? So in design, we try to make sure that our properties are as efficiently built as possible, right? And that they're suitable to the kind of operations that we want to do. So what I mean by that is, for instance, in our properties, we typically will not provide plastic bottled water, and we haven't been doing that since 2012. Right. This is something that I know more recently hotels have been doing this, but this is something that we've been doing for years and years. In order to do that, though, you need to have certain infrastructure built within your properties. You need to have sterilization stations. You need to have, proper filtration systems. You need to have bottle filling stations. Those modules are built. They're accommodated within each of the buildings that we create. Additionally, we look at each of the materials. So and of course, each of the hotels, we look at them sort of separately based on the needs. So for instance, Kodaikanal, which was launched in 2018, we used a number of railway planks. They're called railway sleepers, which were essentially upcycled from these old railway tracks. We bought them and we used them, and they're beautiful. And it's a new use for these, railway sleepers, this wood, which is, beautifully sort of cured, but would have been just disposed of, right? So we were actually able to upcycle them and use them within our property. We used a lot of old techniques in the way that we restored the 180-year building that we have on our property as well. So limestone lime plastering, and looking at the architectural techniques that were used, back when it was originally built, and sort of, incorporating that so it could be a much sort of suitable building for that climate. We did that. Obai Tamara, which was launched more recently in 2019, it was a much larger project. Like I said, it was a city project, large building. These buildings tend to be very inefficient in terms of their HVAC, and one of the things that we looked at in that sense was to see, for instance, what was the size of the window. One of the most common mistakes that is made in these sorts of buildings is the curtains will overlap on the window when they're pulled aside, right? So what that means is that your window is larger than it needs to be. The guest from inside is not actually seeing that edge, right, of the window, which is covered by the curtain, but the window is actually much larger than it needs to be. And therefore, a lot more sunlight is coming into the room. And that sunlight, not that it's helping with the guest experience at all, but it causes heat gain within the room. And therefore, your HVAC load has to actually be higher than what it would necessarily need to be, right? So you would have to create bigger systems. You would have to, use more energy to cool a building where you have these sort of unnecessary strips of glass. And it adds up, right? When you have 150 rooms, that heat gain, it adds up. And so, being very mindful, thoughtful about how these decisions are made in order to make these buildings, as efficient as possible, that was something that was really, really, has always been very important to us. So so this process goes through, it happens during the design, and then of course in the building of our properties. And then when it comes to operations, again, each decision is made very, very consciously, right? So like I mentioned, the water. Another thing that we have been doing for years and years in our Tamara property is recycling the soaps which are left behind. These little soaps, people tend to use soap and then there's a little bit of it left behind usually after the guests are leaving. So those soaps are actually recycled into cleaning materials which are used to clean some of the back of the house areas. we look at, for instance, we have our own organic coffee in that property as well. And that was, for us, it was really important that we be organic because we didn't want to introduce, chemicals into that environment. And that in itself has actually been, incredibly beneficial through its side effects, because our land, because of the way that we've kind of cultivated our plants, and we also don't do too much shade management, which means that we don't, we don't uproot trees and things like that. We've left all our trees. Because of that, our soil is actually really firm. And Coorg as a destination, actually as a district, has experienced a number of landslides over the last decade. And we are one of the few places where we really haven't experienced that, because we haven't uprooted these trees. And so it's been sort of this blessing in disguise that we didn't even think about, actually. At the time, we just wanted to leave the trees and make it, a nice haven for the wildlife and, and everything. And the side effect of it was that we've actually been very well protected when, the heavy rains are coming and these landslides are typically happening, in our neighbors' properties. So it's interesting to see, what happens as you do these things. Yeah, and in a number of ways. Sustainability is something that we consider, and environmental sustainability really is something that we consider in all of our decision making, like I said. So again, the going paperless is another initiative that we have taken up, something that we'd like to really push forward in 21-22. And then of course, the last thing is, I spoke about people, planet, and then there's profit. I think on the profit side, what's really important for me is, as an organization, we be a very resilient one. And resilience is built through a number of things, but risk management is one of the key ones, right? So for instance, water scarcity is something which is happening just so much across the country right now. And particularly in some of the regions that we're located, water scarcity is a serious problem. And of course, as a hotel, you consume quite a bit of water. And so one of the things that we did to manage that risk, and to avoid us from having to purchase water from other sources, was to create really serious water harvesting tanks. And so we have, huge capacities of rainwater harvesting in Coorg as well as in Kodaikanal. We do natural rainwater harvesting in our city hotels, of course. We're also looking, we're starting to pilot some solar projects beyond what we've already done, but looking to see what we can do with that more and more. But yeah, I think resilience is something which is so important. And that's also why the organization is built as sort of this multi-brand organization. We haven't sort of siloed ourselves in any single type of property. We're in 3 different very clear segments. We're in luxury, leisure, upscale business, and mid-segment economical. And that's something which I think is, for any hospitality organization, having that diversification. And of course, we also have diversification with our properties in Germany, with geographical diversification. And that further creates this resilience to the organization. And I think in COVID particularly, it's been very clear, right? Because our leisure hotels have rebounded very quickly. And of course, the business city hotels have not. So that's the way that I look at sustainability as a whole. Yeah.
So fascinating insights. I think the point about the soil conservation is something I think that can be adopted by a number of organizations, not just hospitality, but across the board in India, because we see these problems everywhere. And the whole point about the overlapping curtains, very interesting. At some point of time in my life, I was an engineer, so hearing that kind of stuff is very interesting. It also reminded me of a very funny anecdote from an old Hindi movie where the movie is called Golmaal, where Amol Palekar says that if we wear kurtas which are 4 inches shorter, think about how much cloth we would be able to save and how many people we would be able to save.
Totally.
So,
yeah. We've had some, it's interesting, right? Once you get into the details, and really what I realized is that's all it takes. You just need to care. And if you get into some of these details, not only do you save money, because of course, you're reducing your glass, your requirement for glass, you're actually saving money. And that's, there's so much you can do, but that's one of the things that I've always really wanted to, talk about when it comes to sustainability, is that there is an economic benefit to it. right? By reducing the amount of glass that you are using in building, by reducing your HVAC capacity, right? By reducing your consumption. These are all things which actually lead to economic benefit, right? And I think the fine line that hospitality has to sort of manage is your guest expectation, right? So, so one of the experiments that we did many years ago was to take a look at our taps in one of our properties, and we installed these aerators, which are very, very inexpensive. And we put them in. Actually, I know one place where they actually took a coin and they just put it inside the tap to reduce the flow. It's really inexpensive jugaad type of a thing. And we just tested it. We just wanted to see what would guests say, right? How would they say anything about the water pressure? They didn't say anything. Right. I mean, and I think a large part of this is also talking to your guests, explaining to them, educating them, and telling them, listen, we all need to be more conscious. But really, I think many people in the industry, in our industry, and of course other industries, they're so scared of what will happen. But piloting it doesn't really cost you much, and it doesn't hurt. And that's my thing with this. I think that not only will it not hurt you as badly as you think it will hurt you, it will also get you so much economic benefit if you choose to invest in it and just take the time and the thought to do it, and like I said, I think thoughtfulness is really the key to it. It's as long as you have that intention and you are willing to sort of invest some of that your brain to it, it's not that hard.
Yeah, I think it's the small things that matter sometimes more than the bigger things, right?
Yeah.
And I think what you said last is most important. If you communicate to your guests, they respond well, because if they don't know why something changed, they might react the way people would normally. But I think people would appreciate such initiatives. But while these are all great insights, what we'd like to also understand is how this all started. How did it come about that you set up this enterprise, and what's your long-term vision for it? What do you want to achieve at the end of it all?
Yeah, so the way that it started was, so I used to, I'm not from a hotelier background. I studied one thing, I worked in finance after that, and then I actually, my first foray was in a restaurant company, which I started when I was very young. And having done that, I ended up, I went to business school, and, this property was getting built. One of our properties, our first property, was getting built at that time. And it was, there was a lot of talk about going with an external operator, actually, for that property. And, with a little bit of youth and overconfidence and interest and passion, of course, for the industry, I said, why don't let's try operating it. Let's see what we can do, right? Let's create a brand. And so it started off sort of with that little thought. And we did, and we realized that there was a very interesting niche for us to sort of be these responsible hoteliers, that nobody else was really thinking about it in the way that we were. And it started with just that one property, and then we started to grow, right? So we launched our first Lilac so the first property was launched in 2012, just as I was graduating from business school, actually. And then we launched our Lilac brand a little bit later, and then, we've grown. And so right now we have 5 properties in India, and we have 3 properties in Germany. These, the plan for Tamara, I mean, like I said, we were very conscious to create these 3 different brands. And so right now we're expanding. Our next property that we're launching is a property on the backwaters in Alleppey in Kerala. And that will be an Ayurveda focused resort, very sort of serious wellness, catering to people who really want to invest time into their own well-being, and something that we really believe right now is a great time to sort of, offer into the market. And then we have a couple of Lilacs which are under development as well in Guruvayur, Kannur, Kumbakonam. And then we're looking for acquisitions as well. So we're continuing, we're looking at acquisitions sort of across the board within all 3 of our brands, here as well as abroad. It's a the goal. I mean, the initial our goal right now is we wanted to reach 1,000 keys by 2025, and that's something that we are very focused on, and I'm sure we will achieve. The larger goal, of course, is to be one of the best hospitality brands in the country, if not the world. Right? I think that there is a space for a brand like ours, which focuses on responsible hospitality, providing memorable service. Really trying to showcase that, hospitality can be done in this way, which is mindful, thoughtful, and really, working with the local community, working with the local environment in a way which I've not seen mostly. And so that's the point. I mean, I think finally we'd like to make our mark. And we also, one of the other things that, we don't talk about much, but, I'm very passionate about is being truly outstanding employers. I think that this is an industry where we are one of the top employers in the country, right? Tourism accounts for 10% of the organized labor in this country, and it's only. I mean, I think it's about time that we step up and say that we're also some of the best employers in the country, right? One of my passion projects is something called Satya. It's within our family foundations. It's running within our family foundations. And what it is a hospitality skilling and mentoring academy for students who come from rural backgrounds, underprivileged backgrounds. And it's really interesting because, one thing that I realized very early on in my career, because I was, doing restaurants earlier as well, is that so many of the people that come into this industry, they're the first people in their families to enter the organized sector. They don't have mentorship. They don't have somebody telling them how to, ask for leave properly. They'll, for instance, I mean, it's such a simple thing, you or I, we know how to approach our boss to ask for leave. Some of these kids don't even know how to do that. So they're highly unprofessional when they come in. And as a result of that, there's a very heavy attrition, which happens at the bottom levels of the industry. And this was something that I really wanted to sort of counter and, of course, bring more people into the industry, because there is this sort of intrinsic demand for people that we always need good people. So Satya was sort of a way of bridging that, of bringing more people into the industry, creating that interest, but also sort of empowering them to sustain within this industry. And so, for Tamara as well, I really hope that we are good employers, that we create good policies. We treat our people fairly, and that's something which is very important to me. I think one of the intrinsic passions that I have has always been about creating employment. And I think this is an industry where I get that, I'm able to do that. And it makes me very happy and fulfilled. So creating employment, of course, is one big part of it, but being great employers is another thing which really drives me and the organization.
Awesome. So it's interesting, right? There's an industry which we keep hearing is in short supply, right? Anytime we hear about the hotel industry, whether it's for leisure, whether it's for business, all we hear is that we are so short of supply that we could probably double and still have room for growth, and so the impact that it could have on employment, on entrepreneurship, is huge, right? So from that, I'd like to cue into my next question. As an entrepreneur, what would be your advice to people who want to get into entrepreneurship in general, but also into this industry, and also specifically to women entrepreneurs, right? What's your overarching advice, and what are some of the key things that you think they should keep in mind?
Okay, so there's kind of three different buckets that you asked me for. I think generally what I tell entrepreneurs is that it's a marathon. I mean, entrepreneurship is very difficult. It's very tumultuous. You go through your ups and downs, and you have to treat it as a learning experience. You will not know things on day one. I clearly, I was just before this interview, I was just thinking about sort of my journey, sort of through my 20s and now into my 30s, right? And how much experience matters, right? As much as you think when you're very young, experience makes such a big difference in terms of your perspectives and sort of how you react to different situations. And I think that entrepreneurship in that sense, you have to live it. I mean, you really have to be in it, live it, and take it as sort of a marathon and not try to kind of put everything sort of on your head all at once. And my hope for entrepreneurs is that they are mindful of people. One of the things that I see in entrepreneurship very often these days, which really it's disappointing to me because I always thought like our generation would be better than this, is to see that they don't treat people very well. We see so many businesses where sort of people are treated as commodities. And I truly believe that there is, we, especially our generation and the younger generation who's coming up into entrepreneurship now, there's an opportunity for us to be better leaders than, our predecessors. And so I think it's really important. I hope that's one piece of advice because I do see it pays back. The reason I say this is not for like, a greater good type of a thing. I mean, that's there, of course, but it really does pay back. I have seen that being fair to people, being kind to people, it pays back, and they stand with you when you need them to stand, when you need them. And that's something which is so important in this fickle world, right? And when you go through crises and things like that, and crises will continue to happen. Right. I've seen in my journey over the last couple of years, like there is a crisis every year. Of course, COVID has been the worst, but before that there was demonetization. Before that there was, I forget which one came first, GST. Then before that there's flooding, and so the state borders got shut. There's always something going wrong, and so you have to treat it as a marathon and not a sprint. To kind of consider that, hey, there's a long-term vision that we need to achieve. For specifically, for young or women entrepreneurs, I think you were mentioning, I think, you have to, I think with women entrepreneurs, I mean, I've been in a very lucky position. I've been doing this now for it feels like a long time, actually. I guess now it's been like 12, 13 years. It's, the challenges are different. I mean, I think one of the things that often gets me is that, I was the only woman in the room. And that's oftentimes very lonely. I mean, firstly, as a leader, you're lonely, right? And then on top of that, if you're the only woman in the room, it is lonely, and it is sometimes very demoralizing. So I would say try to bring in as many women as you can into your core team. I'm doing that, and I've been able to do that. I have some fantastic women that I work with who are part of my core team, my senior team, and it is incredible. It's really, it's just amazing, and I really enjoy it. And to have that diversity within an organization, it not only enriches me, but it enriches the organization to have those perspectives and to have those, those incredibly smart, passionate people behind it. So, that's one thing I would say, like, you have to do it actively. It doesn't happen passively, unfortunately, it doesn't happen passively, build those, you have to actively go out and look for women who can support you and be part of your team and bring that diversity into your team. And I find it personally, it's incredibly valuable and enriching.
Great. So I think we've heard some wonderful insights about your business, about your journey as an entrepreneur. But before we let you go, we'd like to understand a little bit about you as a person, right? What's been your personal journey as an entrepreneur? How do you balance work and life? What interests you? And what's a typical day for you like?
Well, right now, it's interesting, right? Because I have two young children. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And so I don't know if you could hear them in the background, but they're somewhere around, and they, and of course, there's homeschooling for the older one. And so that's been really challenging. I appreciate teachers so much more than I ever did before. The kind of patience you need to do homeschooling is phenomenal. And I applaud every parent and teacher who's been doing this, over the last year and before that. So balance right now, of course, is something which is fairly impossible. But I've always believed that balance is not something which really can be attained, right? Personally, I think, things that interest me are, things that interest everybody. It's things like food and movies and, travel and all that good stuff. And, unfortunately, travel has been off the, off the radar for a while. But, food is still there, thankfully. And yeah, I mean, in the last year, I think one of the great things is, although like it's been really intense to sort of be in front of a screen and work like this, one of the great things has been being able to be with my family, and actually spend some quality time. Like I know right before this pandemic, how much time I was getting to spend, especially with my younger one, and how that has just exponentially gone up since the pandemic. And that's a blessing. I mean, she went from 1 to 2. Unfortunately, half of her life has been, spent like this. But, she and I got to spend a lot of time together. And so that's been really wonderful. The thing I do miss is sports. I'm an avid cricket fan. I love going to matches, and I love, thankfully I have, my husband is in the sports field. And so, I was able to go to a lot of different types of matches fairly constantly. And unfortunately, that's not been possible. I really miss that. And I'm looking very much forward to getting back to that and getting back to some amount of travel and, being able to explore and engage with people from all over. I really miss that. But yeah.
Wonderful speaking to you today, Shruti. I think there's a lot more that we can learn about your business. I think, at VCWorld, we've got multiple verticals. We've got a hotelier vertical. We've got a wellness vertical that we're coming up with. We've got a people vertical. So I think from all of those aspects, we'd love to understand more about your business. I think as the pandemic recedes, hopefully soon now with the second wave in. So great, Shruti. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. And we hope we can have more conversations with you in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me.